Hello everyone, I'm Alexander Hamilton, and welcome back to the Enlightenment podcast. Everyone who is listening, relax, sit down, and enjoy today's show. Today we have 4 special guests from the Enlightenment Absolutism era. I'd like to welcome Montesquieu, Peter the Great, Rousseau, and Frederick the Great. Thank you all for being here. I know all your schedules are tight, so let's not waste any more time. On today's episode of the Enlightenment podcast, we're going to be talking about the social contract. More specifically, what is the best way to govern for the welfare of all people? First, I want to start with you, Peter. You're renowned as one of the most famous autocratic rulers of our time, and just to remind our listeners, an autocrat is a person who rules in an absolute monarchy, which is a form of government where one person has absolute control. Peter, you have the mic. Thank you for having me on the podcast. Now, before I answer, I just want to give the readers some background information. In the late 1600s, compared to the rest of Europe, Russia was very underdeveloped. Back then, Russia could be compared to the Ottoman Empire, which was considered the sick man of Europe in the 19th and 20th centuries. Everything was weak, from its education to its military and economy. Plus, the church was hoarding all the wealth. Obviously, the way Russia was run was not working. The people of Russia signed a social contract with the government, and the government has the obligation to serve the people. To answer your question, I believe the best way the government should be run is an absolute monarchy, or best case scenario, a more centralized government. Take Russia, for example. An absolute monarchy allows St. Petersburg to better unify the people and create reforms, and because of its centralized absolute monarchy, I was able to westernize the country and improve the education, economy, and military. And I was able to reform the church to share their wealth. A more centralized government allows things to get done. Thank you, Peter. Very interesting points. Montesquieu, you look eager to speak. You may counter his argument and answer the question. Thank you. Now I want to go back on Peter's point of the social contract. The government has the obligation to serve the people. Yet Peter, your people are still poor, hungry, and uneducated. You say that you westernized and improved the education, but those improvements were only implemented for the Russian upper levels. It must be noticed that your centralization of government, abuse of your absolutism, and consolidation of power for yourself failed to improve the life of the common man. In reality, you have hurt your people because you took away many of their freedoms, including their voice in the government. You are supposed to preserve their life, liberty, and property, not throw it all away. In fact, you proved my political theories and my writings like the spirit of laws. To answer your question, I believe the best way to govern for the welfare of the people is for the creation of 3 branches of government to be separated into 3 equal powers, as I like to call it, separation of powers. In my book, The Spirit of Laws, I believe and have stood by my points of a more decentralized government. The legislative, executive, and judicial authorities must be separated, and each branch should have the power to limit any branch that becomes corrupt. If they are all under one institution, like in Peter the Great's case, you have taken away the people's freedoms and have failed to do your part in the social contract. Thank you, Montesquieu. Those are some very good points. Rousseau, would you like to add on? I would, thank you. Montesquieu, I believe we have some common ground in many topics. In a way, I agree that other branches should be able to limit the power of other branches. Limiting each branch's power and allowing each branch to fulfill checks and balances is a good idea to avoid corruption and abuse of power. Because, if they aren't serving the people, the government is obligated to give up their power in failure of keeping their promise of the social contract. A social contract is comparable to a man's life. When the man is born, he is free. However, he is locked in chains under the authority of the government to ensure his own interests are protected, which are life, liberty, and property. Now, to answer the question, I believe the best way to govern for the welfare of the people is popular sovereignty. Do what the people want you to do. The whole idea of a social contract is absolutely neglected and tossed out when it comes to absolute monarchs like Peter the Great. These monarchs inherit a society like it's their property and can now toy with it however they please. Then, absolute monarchs brainwash their people to believe in divine right. No matter how terrible of a job they're doing at ensuring their part in their social contract, there is nothing the people can do since their authority was derived from God, ensuring they can never be held accountable for their actions. This, I believe, is a terrible system of governing for the welfare of the people, because government should be of the people, by the people, and for the people. Thank you, Rousseau. Frederick, you're the last one here. What do you think is the best way to govern for the welfare of all people? Well, I agree with points from both Rousseau and Peter. I do believe the best way to govern is absolute monarchy. However, it is my duty that I uphold my part and fulfill the social contract. I also agree with the idea of popular sovereignty. It is the responsibility of the government to do what the people want. And divine right is just an excuse for leaders to not be held accountable for their actions. I modernized Prussia, from its government to its judicial system, and allowed the freedom of speech, press, and literature. It's likely I would not be able to create so much positive change without the power absolute monarchy gave me. So that's why I'm in support of it. Thank you, Frederick, and thank you all for coming out today. That is all for the Enlightenment podcast episode. But don't leave yet. On the next episode, we'll have a one-on-one with Aaron Burr, where he'll be taste testing salsa and queso to decide which goes better with chips, after this commercial break.